you asked for additional funding for detention beds there. What is the right number to be able to process individuals near the border, to be able to make decisions and to be able to respond rather than having to release so many individuals on their own recognizance and saying, we'll follow up with you in the days ahead. We don't have time to process now.
Senator, we have been employing expedited removal.
But most people are actually not removed quickly, though they have the title expedited removal. It may be years before they're actually removed.
We actually have been able to remove people under that process expeditiously, as its title would indicate, and the additional detention beds that we have sought in our supplemental funding request is to be able to expand expedited removal consistent with the model that I outlined.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Lankford. Senator Rosen, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters, Ranking Member Paul, and for holding this important hearing. I also want to thank the witnesses for their testimony today, and Secretary Mayorkas, I want to thank you for working with my office and the entire Nevada delegation to ensure that the upcoming Formula One Grand Prix, just in a few weeks, has the federal interagency security support it needed. We raised that tier rating, and we appreciate it. I'm going to go right into border security, Mr. Secretary. As you know, fentanyl is destroying communities across the country. Nevada, no exception. According to the CDC, we lost a staggering 949 Nevadans to opioid overdose deaths in 2021 alone, and the problem only continues to get worse. As I've stated before, stopping the influx of these deadly drugs starts by strengthening our border security through a significant increase in resources. That's why earlier this month, I joined with several of my colleagues in urging President Biden to allocate additional funds and resources to end the flow of fentanyl at our southwest border. So, Mr. Secretary, as the Senate considers the administration's supplemental funding request and looks to prioritize what is most critical for that package, what additional resources can Congress allocate to DHS specifically to strengthen your ability, the department's ability, to detect and intercept fentanyl at our ports of entry so we can address the worsening crisis?
Thank you very much, Senator. The scourge of fentanyl has been building year over year for more than five years. We have sought in the supplemental funding request additional resources for the Department of Homeland Security to combat the fentanyl epidemic. Specifically, we have sought approximately $850 million for enhanced technology, our non-intrusive inspection technology. We have also sought funds for additional officers so that they can deploy to the ports of entry where the predominant amount of fentanyl is smuggled through passenger vehicles and commercial trucks so that we can interdict more of the fentanyl. We are accomplishing that at an unprecedented level because of the incredible personnel that we have and the strategies that we are employing to maximize results.
Thank you. I want to move now to something that is rising anti-Semitism. How do we counter that? So following Hamas's brutal October 7th terrorist attack on innocent Israelis, our nation has witnessed a dramatic increase in anti-Semitic threats and incidents targeting Jewish Americans, including Jewish students being threatened and harassed on college campuses. According to the Anti-Defamation League, reported incidents of anti-Semitism have increased by 388% compared to the same period last year. Government agencies have a responsibility to ensure the safety and security of Jewish Americans. I'm encouraged that the administration's supplemental budget request includes a significant allocation for the life-saving nonprofit security grant program, which I have been calling for. There's still so much more to be done. Last week, Senator Lankford and I led a bipartisan, bicameral letter to DHS and FBI requesting their immediate attention to this crisis and a briefing on the current threat assessment, the interagency coordination efforts, and preparedness and resiliency measures that are in place to prevent and respond to violence against Jewish Americans. So to Secretary Mayorkas, and then Director Wray. Can you please commit to providing members of Congress with this briefing we asked for? And could you outline the specific actions your agencies are taking to prevent and respond to this alarming rise in anti-Semitic violence?
Senator, you certainly have my commitment for that briefing. It was just a couple weeks, I think, before the terrorist attacks of October 7th that I attended and spoke at the Eradicate Hate Summit in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and met with survivors of the Tree of Life tragedy. On October 8th, I participated in a convening hosted by the Anti-Defamation League, where more than 700 participants heard from me with respect to the threat landscape and what we would do to address the aftermath of the horrific terrorist attacks. Since then, we have engaged every day with the Jewish American community, as well as other communities of faith that feel under tremendous threat, to educate them about the steps they can take to ensure the safety and security of their worshipers and their members. We have deployed our protective security advisors in each state to work with communities of faith. We have shared information and intelligence with our state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement partners in partnership with the FBI. I have spoken with a number of leaders of colleges and universities with respect to their need to take leadership and to ensure the safety and security of the students on their campuses. We are doing a whole series of actions to address this moment.
Thank you. Director Wray.
Absolutely. I look forward to having our folks participate in the briefing that you requested. I will say that this is a threat that is reaching, in some ways, sort of historic levels, in part because, as you know all too well, the Jewish community is targeted by terrorists really across the spectrum. Homegrown violent extremists, foreign terrorist organizations, both Sunni and Shia, domestic violent extremists, and in fact, our statistics would indicate that for a group that represents only about 2.4% of the American public, they account for something like 60% of all religious-based hate crimes. And so we're trying to do our part, both by tackling it through our joint terrorism task forces, hate crime investigations, outreach both nationally and locally at every field office level, intelligence sharing, training. I know I've spent a lot of time engaging with SCN, for example, ADL, others. And we also created a fusion cell that brings together the expertise of both our hate crimes folks and our domestic terrorism folks to make sure that we're seeing the full landscape and doing our best to be proactive in this space.
Thank you both. I look forward to that briefing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Rosen. Senator Scott, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Chairman Peters. Thank each of you for being here. Thank you, Secretary Mayorkas, for returning my phone call the other day. And Director Wray, thank you again for the change you made to your call center operations after the Parkland shooting. The savage brutality the world witnessed on October 7th and has learned more about over the past 3 weeks is indescribable. You know, babies beheaded. We just learned of a young lady beheaded. We have stories of young girls raped and then burned alive, people shot point blank. It's just unbelievable. More than 1,400 people, including 33 Americans, have been killed. More than 200 people, including Americans, were taken hostage by Iran-backed Hamas terrorists. I think it's put all of us and it's put the world on alert. And I know our Jewish families all across my state and all across the country are pretty scared to death right now what's going on. It's also showed that these terrorists don't require advanced weapons systems or sophisticated war strategies. They need guns and vehicles. We saw a similar low-tech attack on 9/11. 19 terrorists murdered 2,977 Americans after taking over planes with box cutters. So I'm bravely concerned that our country is once again missing the clear signs of danger and that the risk of a terror attack on American soil, coordinated or orchestrated by a foreign terror organization, is higher than it's been in decades. The mission of the FBI begins like this: to protect and defend the United States against terrorist and foreign intelligence threats. Director Wray, so I trust this threat is something you're clearly focused on. That's what you've said in your testimony so far today. Everyone, I know we've had a lot of talk about how we've gotten here, and there's a lot of colleagues that have talked about that today. But let's focus on where we are and what we ought to be doing next. We also know we have a lot of people in the United States from countries who have large populations of people and even leadership who hate Jews, just absolutely hate Jews and the American way of life. We know that 70,000 Afghans came into the United States, largely unvetted, after the botched withdrawal of U.S. forces in 2021. CBP data from between October 2021 and October 2023 shows that agents encountered 6,386 nationals from Afghanistan. So that's almost 77,000 people from Afghanistan, largely unvetted, as well as 659 from Iran and 538 from Syria. Now let's remember, it only took 19 terrorists to do 9/11. Agents also encountered 164 people from Lebanon, 139 from Yemen, 123 from Iraq. Director Wray, on Sunday, October 15th, you told reporters that, quote, here in the U.S., we cannot and do not discount the possibility that Hamas or other foreign terrorist organizations could exploit the conflict to call on their supporters to conduct attacks on our own soil. I think it's important to understand that what you're saying here, and that we have to make it very clear to the American people that the threat of terror is real and rising in the United States, and I think we would all agree on that. So just to be clear with the American people, what I'm hearing from you today is that the threats are on the rise and our homeland is at great risk of danger. So that's where we are. So now let's talk about where we go. So Director Wray, so that morning my 11-year-old grandson was with me, and so we watched as the Hamas terrorists came across and started hearing the stories. So I was trying to explain to him what a terrorist is. So how would you define a terrorist?
Well, I think a terrorist is somebody who commits violence in furtherance of some ideology or political or social goal. It's probably the best definition I would use.
Okay. In media interviews, you have repeatedly spoken about the potential for threats posed by lone wolves in the wake of the Hamas terrorist attack on Israel. Is it fair for the American people to interpret this as you or the FBI are not concerned at all with a coordinated attack by foreign terrorists on Americans here on U.S. soil?
No, that would not be how they should interpret it. That's why I said we cannot and do not discount it. It is true that over the last several years, and I think Director Abizaid said something similar in her opening statement, that we went through a period where the traditional structured foreign terrorist organization threat in the U.S. subsided some in favor of this inspired, ISIS-inspired, let's say, attack.
That's passed.
But while that threat hasn't gone away, to be clear, that threat has not gone away. What has now increased is the greater possibility of one of these foreign terrorist organizations directing an attack in the United States. We haven't seen evidence that it's actually happening yet, but what we have seen is, and I listed them off in my opening remarks, one terrorist organization after another calling for attacks. And
so we should wake up.
It is a time to be concerned. We are in a dangerous period.
So the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at the Department of Homeland Security issued a report last month warning that foreign terrorist organizations are looking to capitalize on the ability to easily enter the United States at our southern border. So Director Wray, is the FBI able to track all threats and prevent these individuals from conducting an attack on U.S. soil?
I couldn't say that we were able to detect all individuals. The people that we know about, as Secretary Rumsfeld used to say, the known, we're quite good at together with our partners. But it is the unknown that I worry about quite a bit.
So, Director Wray, can you say that we do not have either individual foreign terrorists or terror cells affiliated with foreign groups currently operating in the United States?
Well, we're not tracking that, but again, I point back to what it is. The gaps in our intelligence are real, and it's something that we have concerns about.
So, Director Wray, so what would you say right now to the American public? Because like in my state, I've got a significant Jewish population. They're scared to go to synagogue, Chabad. They're scared to send their kids to day schools. So, but it's not just them. It's, other individuals, like my daughters called me and said, should they be sending their kids to school? What would you tell Americans right now about the threat today as compared to before?
This is not a time for panic, but it is a time for vigilance. We shouldn't stop conducting our daily lives, going to schools, houses of worship, and so forth. but we should be vigilant. You often hear the expression, if you see something, say something. That's never been more true than now, and that's probably partly why the American people are reporting more tips and leads to us, and we're pursuing those threats and leads as vigorously and responsibly as we can.
Thank you.
Scott, Senator Marshall, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you so much. Mr. Secretary, approximately how many illegal aliens in this country or here on asylum have direct ties to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Islamic Jihad or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran?
Senator Marshall, let me assure you that individuals that pose a risk to our national security are our highest enforcement priority. The safety and security of the American public.
Do you have any idea how many numbers, what those numbers are? Is it tens, is it hundreds, is it thousands?
An individual who poses a risk to our national security is our highest enforcement priority. And if detention,
So you don't know the answer to the question?
and if detention is indeed warranted by reason of the risk they present, then we indeed detain them.
Do you have an answer for my question?
I believe I have answered your question.
No, sir, you didn't. I asked you how many have direct ties to Hamas, Hezbollah, Islam Jihad.
Senator, if an individual is identified as having a nexus to one of those organizations, we would consider them a risk to our national security and take appropriate enforcement action to include, for example, detention and removal.
So let's back up. Will DHS and when will DHS disclose the countries of origin of people arrested by Border Patrol on the terrorist watch list?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Senator?
Yep. Will DHS and when will DHS disclose the countries of origin of people arrested by Border Patrol on the terrorist watch list?
If you are referring, Senator, to the terrorist screening data set, just to be precise, I would be pleased to speak with you in the appropriate context. This would not be it.
How many gotaways did CBP record in fiscal year 2023?
I believe, Senator, that number is over 600,000. As I'm sure you are well aware, the phenomenon of gotaways is something that has been a challenge for the Department of Homeland Security for decades. In fact, it is a powerful example of a broken immigration system.
Thank you. I want to talk about Chinese nationals for a second. Would you agree with me that over 18,000 Chinese nationals, many are military-aged young men, have illegally crossed the southern border in fiscal year 2023?
Senator, I don't have the precise number, but as I said, individuals who are encountered are placed into immigration enforcement proceedings, and if they qualify for asylum,
With all due respect, you would agree with me it's over 18,000, though.
I do not have the number at my
Do
disposal.
you know where the Chinese nationals are settling, where they're working, why they're here? How do you follow them?
Senator, if an individual has fled China and seeks asylum and qualifies for asylum, for example, if they fear persecution
I understand
by
that.
reason of their membership in a particular social group,
How do you follow them? That's not my question. How do you follow them? Do you have a heightened concern for these people?
so, Senator, if an individual poses a risk to public safety or national security, they are deemed a priority and can be placed in detention if the facts so warrant. If indeed we determine in the exercise of our law enforcement discretion that detention is not required because they do not present.
We understand. We all understand all that, Mr. Secretary. Thank you. I want to go back to gotaways. I'm sure you'll agree with me that under Mr. Biden, that at least 1.7 million gotaways have evaded apprehension at our border. How many of these known gotaways have convictions in their prior country for rape or murder? How many of these known gotaways have been prosecuted and deported?
3 points, Senator. Number one, as I articulated earlier in this hearing, we are seeing a number of displaced individuals throughout our hemisphere that is unprecedented. Number one. Number two, we are dealing with a broken immigration system. Number three.
But you're not going to answer my question.
Number three, if an individual.
How many of these known gotaways have committed crimes in the United States since you were sworn in?
Let me assure you that if an individual poses a risk to public safety pursuant to the enforcement guidelines.
But you have no ability to measure that?
Pursuant to the enforcement guidelines that I promulgated on September 30th of 2021, the individual is.
How many of these known gotaways are trafficking fentanyl?
The individual is an enforcement priority.
How many of these known gotaways are trafficking fentanyl?
Senator, we well know that the trafficking of fentanyl is not specific to a nationality. Tragically, we have individuals from various countries of origin. We have American citizens trafficking in fentanyl. Fentanyl is a scourge that we must all work together to overcome.
Okay, let's talk about the 169 individuals encountered on the terror watch list between the ports of entry in fiscal year 2023. How many were deported? How many are jailed? How many are still in the country?
Senator, with respect to the individuals on the terrorist screening data set, I would be pleased to provide you with the numbers in the appropriate context.
Of the over 75,000 special interest aliens who crossed our border illegally this fiscal year, what are their whereabouts? How are you tracking these people?
We have a number of ways of tracking them, Senator. If, in fact, they present a national security or public safety threat, we very well may detain them. If we do not believe that detention is appropriate, we have alternatives to detention. It's known by its acronym ATD, and we have various levels of supervision depending on the enforcement profile that the individual presents.
Okay. The folks back home, when they look at the evidence, they see that the DEA seized over 380 million doses of fentanyl in 2022. 73,000 Americans died from fentanyl poisoning in 2022, mostly young adults, school-aged children, and that 90% of the fentanyl comes from our southern border. You know, considering that just last month, our Border Patrol had almost 270,000 encounters, including 75,000 special interest aliens. Do Americans feel they're more safe today or less safe today under the policies of this administration?
Senator, we are taking it to the cartels, to the traffickers of fentanyl in an unprecedented way, with more resources and more efficient and productive operations than ever before.
But you would agree with me that Americans feel less safe today than they did before the start of this administration. And your testimony has always solidified the view that American people, that they don't have confidence in the job that you're doing. This is why I believe the defining issue in this next election is going to be exactly this. Are our families safer today than they were 3 years ago?